Hello, Gilly Brigade. I'm here. Welcome back to the line. I'm here today to do something a little different from the content that I would normally do. I'm going to do a developmental analysis of the character of Jason Todd, aka Red Hood, from the animated film Batman Under the Red Hood. This may seem a little out of the blue for me, considering my previous content on this channel and other platforms, but I'm currently in my final year of a master's program to become a therapist and school counselor. I'm also a huge fan of DC, and when I had the opportunity to write an APA style paper in school analyzing a character, I chose Jason Todd. As you can see, I'm playing Arkham Origins as the background footage for this video. I will use this to keep you guys distracted a little as we go through the analysis of Jason. Throughout this video, I'm going to explain some characters and moments from the film, so I apologize if you're already familiar with this or who I'm talking about, but I want to give background in case some people are not familiar with what I'm talking about. So let's get cooking. To start off, the film Batman Under the Red Hood is a complicated action movie with strong psychological themes. It's particularly focused on Jason Todd. The film is about an hour and 15 minutes long, and in that short span, the writers convey some of the most important aspects of the comic book arc that was released years before. There are 6 concepts that I will be covering in this analysis of Jason as they relate to psychology, and those include attachment theory, Erikson's psychosocial development, Bandura's social learning theory, Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. I have a hard time with that name. Kohlberg's stages of moral development, and trauma and resilience. I will also, at the end, a little bit talk about multicultural and contextual factors as well. Segueing nicely into Jason himself, a little bit of his background. He is the second adopted child of Bruce Wayne, or Batman. Spoiler alert, sorry. He's also the second Robin. He takes on that role after the previous Robin, Dick Grayson, steps away from that role. He was raised in a household filled with neglect and addiction. He also lost his father at quite a young age. He was surrounded by violence throughout his upbringing in the slums of Gotham, and he also died around the age of 15 to 16 years old. We don't know exactly, it's one of the two. And then he was subsequently revived when he was around 17 or 19 years of age. It was about 2 years from the time he died. Now, with his background info out of the way, let's stew over some theories. Attachment theory was proposed by John Bowlby, and it suggests that early childhood guardian relationships influence 3 aspects later on in life. Those 3 aspects include emotional regulation skills, relationship schemas. A relationship schema, for those who do not know, basically an example of this would be what makes up a relationship you have with a mom or a dad. Like, what does that look like? That is what a relationship schema is. It's an archetype that you have in your head. Expectations for future relationships was the final category that influences attachment theory. There's 4 styles. We will not go over all of them in the course of this video. That is kind of beyond the scope of what's necessary, but I'll go over the names of them at least, and I'll have a little infographic here that you can check out. They are anxious ambivalent, avoidant, secure, and disorganized. This is particularly where we see Jason Todd at up at this point. It is considered almost like the antithesis of secure, which is seen as the ideal attachment style. Disorganized highlights that the individual will have struggles with managing their emotions and not trusting others, especially caregivers. This is usually influenced by their upbringing, and in Jason's case, it's also by a lack of consistent caregivers. Again, we mentioned early on his father died when he was young. Mom, we're not shown this in the film, so I might be extrapolating from comics, but his mom was struggling with addiction. And then the scene that illustrates this quite well is actually the first introductory scene where Batman meets Jason. This shows Jason attempting to steal the Batmobiles off of the tire the tires off of the Batmobile. Jason was stuck in a survival-focused mindset here. This shows that he's left to fend for himself, and that his caregivers were not around to help take care of him and meet his basic needs. Following that up, we have some scenes with Batman, the training scenes, and as well as the fact that Batman adopts Jason. Batman attempts to provide stability and structure, which he does those parts quite well, but he is emotionally distant from Jason, which stops the secure attachment style from fully forming. that is kind of seen as a major focus and a need of a secure attachment for that to happen. Um, this also is illustrated when Batman tries to address Jason's issues with aggression, but Batman fails to acknowledge the emotions tied to why he is so aggressive, and that leaves it to be a very unresolved, and Jason is unreceptive to it. The final confrontation scene. This shows unresolved attachment needs met for by Jason himself, and it shows Jason interprets Batman's choice to not kill the Joker as a personal betrayal. This shows that his schema is shaped by an internal schema is shaped by mistrust and insecurity. Moving on from here, we're actually going to talk about Erik Erikson's psychosocial development model. This is an 8-stage model. We're only going to be really highly focusing on stage 5, but again, flash a graphic here of all the 8 stages if you want to read into it a little bit more for yourself. Stage 5 is supposed to take place between the ages of 12 to 18 years old. Again, this is rough. The two tasks is identity versus role confusion. Forming an identity is seen as the good or the adaptive outcome. And then there is the role confusion state, which means that you're in a kind of a state of crisis, is the way that Erikson would have described this. His time as Robin throughout the film shows that he's stuck in a state of role confusion. He's trying to be a hero in the way that he knows Batman and Robin are meant to be. He does not do very well at lining up with this. There's a bit of a mismatch there for him because of his upbringing. His upbringing made violence very normal for him. So for him, this typical goody two shoes hero, if you will, it doesn't really mesh for him. In a flashback scene, this kind of illustrates this. They showed Todd incapacitating a criminal and then proceeding to brutalize the criminal even after he was incapacitated, to the point that this individual needed to be taken to the hospital and was almost killed. Batman luckily stops this, but Jason could not reel himself in by himself. This shows that there was a mismatch in his morals that what created this role confusion, and this is also further evidenced by his later transformation into Red Hood. Red Hood is seen as the unhealthy or maladaptive identity formation task that occurred. This identity is seen to me to be quite rigid and is focused on themes of revenge and control, mostly controlling others. Erikson thought it was important to clarify that you need to resolve identity crisis, otherwise you may develop an extreme or inflexible identity, which is what I think if you look at Jason and Red Hood as a character, at least presented in this film, he fits into that quite nicely, unfortunately for him. Moving on to Bandura's social learning theory. This theory proposed the idea that individuals learn behaviors through observation, imitation, and reinforcement. Jason uses observational learning. We see that he's picked things up from his life so far, be it from Batman and the way Batman commits violence, but also his own upbringing. This is what leads him to view Batman's form of violence as limited and not well suited to addressing the needs of what's going on within the community or society. He thinks it'd be better off for society if extreme criminals like the Joker were killed. And his actions as Red Hood help illustrate that his behaviors were learned, but they're influenced by his perceptions. And the example I provide is in the film. We see early on in the film, we see Jason systematically take control of the criminal underworld, and this is kind of a parallel to Batman, in the sense that he's manipulating and controlling the criminals through fear and intimidation, albeit his approach is a little bit less, let's say, good. He kills anyone who doesn't follow his rules. He still allows the criminals to function and sell drugs, for example. They just can no longer sell drugs to kids, which, I mean, I guess that is a little bit better, but I think ideally we wouldn't want them selling illegal drugs to begin with, so it's not perfect by any stretch. Moving on, we are going to talk about Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. This is labeled as the range of tasks that someone can figure out on how to do on their own with help, but they can't, not on their own. They could do it with help, but they can't do it on their own just yet. This emphasizes the importance of tailoring instructions to the needs of the learner that's in front of you. This also kind of makes it important to bring up the concept of scaffold, because scaffolding plays an important role in this. They're kind of interchangeable a little bit. Scaffolding, think about the riding a bike, for example. When you want to teach a child how to ride a bike, you don't just give them a bike and say, all right, figure it out. You can, some kids might, but many will not. Ideally, what you want to do is you want to start by giving them a bike with training wheels, and there's their guardian behind them, kind of following them along to help them feel safe and comfortable, so they can slowly work and get used to how a bike works. Um, and then as they get more and more comfortable, you start to peel off some of those supports. So like the training wheels coming off, or the parent stepping away, whichever order it ends up being. Um, that's kind of the approach of scaffolding. Batman is Jason's main source of scaffolding within this film. And he does well to a certain degree. He tries, but he struggles in helping with emotional development specifically and moral development. And this is illustrated by their training scenes, and again, the scene where Jason brutalizes a criminal. It's proven to be ineffective because Jason does not respond well to Batman's reactions of pulling him off and shoving his moral perspectives onto him. Batman does not emotionally connect with Jason in this, and that's due to his own trauma and his own tunnel vision focus on the mission that he has, which is to protect Gotham from the criminals and try to put them back in prison. Um, Batman's training is rather rigid, and his parenting isn't really tailored to the needs Jason has currently. This ultimately leads to Jason rejecting Batman's no kill rule, which shows he's not ready to learn what Batman is trying to teach him based off of the support that Batman is providing him. So this shows that Bruce would need to adapt the way he's doing things and find a different approach that would help Jason where he's at currently. Moving into our second to last concept to discuss here, we have Kohlberg's stages of moral development. This has 3 levels to it. That's pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. I will have a little graphic here for you to refer to. Each level has 2 stages. Again, I will not go over all of it though, so feel free to read the graphic, and if you decide you want to know more, you can look into it on your own time. Learn a little bit more today. Jason's reasoning in the film shows that he has a conflict between stages 2, instrumental purpose orientation, I refer to it as self-interest, and stage 5, social contract. To make this a little bit more simplified for you, this is a battle Jason's having between what he wants to do, in this case, which is murder at least specific criminals like the Joker that he thinks are a harm to society, and what society says is okay, because typically society doesn't view it as being acceptable for people to go around killing people, regardless of, you know, what they've done or the acts they've committed, and we don't typically just view that as being a good thing. So there's that mismatch and disconnect there. The scene that illustrates this the most is that final confrontation scene. It illustrates it quite well. Jason's view is that killing Joker and criminals like him stops future harm, which does show that Jason is considering what would be good for society, but this is ultimately influenced by his trauma. Jason also shows a disregard or a rejection of stage 4, which is the law and order. He thinks that the systems are ineffective and corrupt, leading for him to be more willing to pursue extreme methods of dealing with these criminals, because he's lost hope in the system itself that exists. So, talking about trauma, it's time to talk about trauma and resilience as it relates to development. Jason's murder at the beginning of the film is obviously going to be quite traumatic, and this disrupts his development. Trauma theory would suggest that trauma impairs emotion regulation and identity formation. We do believe this to be true. Uh, Jason also shows off some symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Some of those include intense anger / irritability, a consistent negative thought pattern or negative mindset, hypervigilance, and self-destructive behaviors. What is self-destructive behaviors? Well, making the choice to go out every night and attempt to murder other people when they could also potentially murder you. That would be, at least from my lens, seen as quite self-destructive. Red Hood itself illustrates, the name itself, I should say, illustrates how he is driven by his trauma. That name was originally a name that the Joker used prior to him becoming the Joker. When Jason was revived, he chose to take this name. I think to a certain degree it was to kind of slap Joker in the face, if you will, but it also illustrates that his trauma is impacting who he is in the current state of mind. Talking about resilience now. Resilience is seen as a positive adaptation to an event despite hard times. Jason's development is showing that he has low levels of resilience, and this is due to his poor coping mechanisms that he uses, which currently consist of controlling others, violence, and aggressive behaviors. His lack of consistent emotional support also probably played a role in his inability to process his trauma. Um, yeah, and I think from there we can talk about some context and multicultural factors. Yeah, to just kind of elaborate a little for those who may not really understand what I'm about to talk about here. But this is factors around Jason that would have influenced his development that are not he himself and his perceptions. First, we're starting with upbringing. His dad, he was a criminal. His dad died when Jason was very young. He instilled traits like aggression and the bad treatment of others in order to benefit himself. And this is with the limited time that his dad was around, because he wasn't around a lot even when he was alive. He spent most of his early life relying on his self to survive. That it was illustrated by the Batmobile scene. This impacted his ability to develop at the same rate as typical youth would. This also increased his aggression and helped shape who he becomes in the future. Talking about his death, PTSD and trauma impact development. The research would indicate this quite well. That's a big thing. Because this is not something that can actually happen, however, it's kind of hard to fully elaborate on the impacts that this would have on an individual. But it's safe to say that this should create another level of trauma due to the novel or unique experience that this is. I mean, how many other people would he be able to interact with that have died and been revived a few years later in their life and physically be older but mentally not be older? And especially when it occurred for Jason. Jason was again we said 16. In between those years 16 to 18, that's seen as a critical point in development. So he's really going to struggle with adapting more because of that critical period that he was in when he died. Um, Talking about Gotham, good old Gotham. He grew up in one of the poorest sections of that city, and as we know, that Gotham itself, in most iterations, is seen as corrupt. There's a lot of issues with crime, and in this case, being in the poorest sections, it reinforced a lot of survival-based behaviors. There's also systematic failures. Criminals staying in prison seems to be just impossible for them to do. So then they get out and start killing more people, selling drugs, whatever. It just furthers this trauma that he was exposed to. Obviously, losing his dad young would impact him too, and having a mother in his life that either wasn't not there at all or was struggling with addiction would also affect his development. Segueing from there into his time with the League of Assassins. The League of Assassins is a global organization of, yes, you guessed it, assassins, that was responsible for reviving him in this movie. Their views are known for extreme violence, and they've attempted to wipe out whole cities for their idea of peace and rebuilding society to make it less, I guess, corrupt, if you will. I think it's a little hypocritical, but this would surround Jason in an echo chamber of similar beliefs for the short period of time he spent with them. We're not given an explicit time frame of how long he spent with them, but still being caught in an echo chamber when he's already in the process of forming beliefs similar to this is quite difficult. So, and the final category in this is demographics. Spoiler, there's like basically nothing I can tell you there. So we're gonna move on. Other than that, he was driven by trauma from his upbringing, his death, and his resurrection. We're going to talk about counseling techniques and concerns/implications. There's going to be a decent amount of infographics popping up here, so if you need to pause at any point, feel free. Basically, in this category, I'm thinking about what I would consider doing with Jason if he was my client, and some techniques that I would want to use based off of what we know about him currently. I would emphasize the importance of using trauma-informed care and developmentally appropriate interventions. Sometimes English isn't good for me. support systems, he lacked a lot of emotional support and processing, so I think that that is going to be the backbone of our work. I want to provide that safe space through client-centered or humanistic care counseling, and that would give him a safe space to work on those emotions and navigating past trauma. Again, I mentioned now we're going to talk about trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, aka TFCBT. This is helpful for emotional dysregulated people. Jason's obviously one of those, and they offer some strategies like cognitive restructuring, which allows me to challenge his beliefs about justice. I could do that in a gentle way to help him maybe reconsider some of his perspectives and expose him to new things, and also help address that negative mindset. The other concept you could consider is group work and social learning strategies, so that way he can work on developing healthy coping resources instead of what he has currently that's been not helpful for him. There's attachment-based work. Yeah, this is obviously influenced by attachment theory that we talked about, but we could use this to help him develop trust, at least trust with hopefully Bruce or maybe just Alfred at a bare minimum. And we could model appropriate relationship interaction so he can understand what a more typical relationship looks like when interacting with others. Then we have emotion-focused therapy. This is very straightforward. This is just to help a client learn and understand and recognize emotions that they previously would have neglected. The final technique is the empty chair. This is from Gestalt theory, a little graphic for you to look at, but this is useful because it can allow Jason to get in touch with that inner child of his who was neglected and mistreated. I want to wrap up here at the end by mentioning that I am not by any means an expert here. This is just my thoughts and interpretation of the film from what I know and the knowledge that I have currently, so don't look at this as the be-all, end-all when describing his character. I hope you enjoyed this video though, however, and I would love to break down other characters in movies, especially from the DC universe. If you have any suggestions for topics, feel free to leave a comment. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to chop that like button and serve the video to others. If you want to see more content, make sure to subscribe, and if you want to make it hot, make sure it's hot, hit that notification bell. Stay spicy, everybody.